Let's review factoring quadratic trinomials. Trinomials that are of the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So for example, 6x squared minus x minus 2. Now, whenever we're factoring, we would always look to see if there's a greatest common factor first. In this case, there is not, but if there were, we would factor that out first. So I like to use an X to organize my work. You don't need to do it that way, but it does sometimes help. We're going to multiply a times c. And I put that at the top of my x. So from 6x squared minus x minus 2, a is 6, b is negative 1, because even though we don't see a number in front of the x, there is a 1 there. And c is negative 2. Signs are important, so if we see negatives, they need to be there. So a times c, we're going to multiply 6 times negative 2, and we get negative 12. And we're going to put b at the bottom of the x, and b in this case is negative 1. So then we want to find two numbers that multiply to a times c, the top, and add to b, the bottom. So multiply to negative 12 and add to negative 1. Sometimes they'll jump out at you, sometimes they won't. This time I get negative 4, positive 3. But if they didn't jump out, I would go through a list in an organized manner. For example, I'd start with 1. So to get negative 12, I could multiply positive 1 times negative 12. Or I could multiply negative 1 times positive 12. Or positive 2 times negative 6. Or negative 2 times positive 6. Or positive 3 times negative 4. Or negative 3 times positive 4. I can't multiply. Well, if I were to continue, well, then I'd get to 4, but I already have that because it's 4 times negative 3, negative 4 times positive 3, and that's the same as having positive 3 times negative 4 and negative 3 times positive 4. So these are all the different pairs of factors. Now let's see what they add up to. Positive 1 and negative 12 adds up to negative 11. Negative 1 and positive 12 adds up to positive 11. Positive 2 and negative 6 adds up to negative 4. Remember, we're looking for a pair that adds up to negative 1. So next pair, negative 2, positive 6, that adds up to positive 4. Positive 3, negative 4. Ooh, negative 1. This is my pair. And that's what we found. It doesn't matter that I wrote it in a different order. If I had written positive 3, negative 4, or negative 4, positive 3, that's the same pair of numbers. Okay, and just to check the last pair, negative 3 and positive 4, that adds to positive 1. We're only going to find one pair that adds up to the number that we need it to add up to. And if we can't find a pair of numbers that multiplies to what we need it to multiply to and adds to the number that we need it to add to, then we can't factor this trinomial. But that's not our case. Third step. So we're going to keep the first and last terms the same in our trinomial, but then we will expand out the middle term using those two numbers that we just found. So the negative 4 and the positive 3. So 6x squared, that was our original first term. We still have our minus 2 at the end. And then I'm using minus 4x, positive 3. And positive 3x. So I use the negative 4, the positive 3. I do need to put x's with them because together the negative 4x plus 3x adds up to the negative 1x that was our original middle term. So we just expanded it out. So I have my 6x squared, I have my negative 2, those stayed the same. And those were the two new ones we got from the negative 4 and the positive 3. Okay, then we will factor by grouping because now we have 4 terms. So let's do that on the next slide. So remember, we're starting with 6x squared minus 4x plus 3x minus 2. We're going to factor by grouping. So we will split it into two pairs. I like to draw a line, but some people just underline the groupings of the pairs. And then we'll factor out greatest common factors from each pair. So I'm looking at 6x squared and negative 4x. My greatest common factor is 2x. When I factor that out of the first pair, I'm left with 3x minus 2. So then I look at my second pair. I have positive 3x minus 2. My greatest common factor there is just 1. And because the third term is positive, this is a positive 1. If my third term in my 4 terms had been negative, I would have factored out the negative with my GCF. And then when I factor out 1 from my second pair, 3x divided by 1 is 3x. Negative 2 divided by 1 is negative 2. And you'll notice I do have a common binomial term. And then we will factor out that common binomial term, the 3x minus 2. So I'll factor that out. I have 3x minus 2. When I factor that out of the first product, I get 2x. When I factor it out of the second product, I get plus 1. And so factoring, I get 3x minus 2 times 2x plus 1.